The indie shooter march steadily continues, further proving that the personal computer is the place to be if players want to maximize the sheer amount of shmups they can play. New titles are steadily being released by indie devs hoping to make the next big bullet hell style game. Himeki Games is one such outfit looking to deliver bullet hell gameplay to the masses with its vertical shmup, An Oath to the Stars.
Released to Steam on August 3, 2017, An Oath to the Stars follows the exploits of Hoshiko, a mech pilot on a mission of revenge after her closest friend betrayed her and downed her ship. Over the course of 5 stages, Hoshiko's quest for vengeance will come to a close. An Oath to the Stars makes a good effort to shake things up with a host of special features. Let's take a closer look.
The gameplay in An Oath to the Stars is pretty simple. Players take control of the H01 with typical 8-way control, which will get them around the screen at a solid rate. The A button on an Xbox-style controller fires the H01's main guns, and the X button handles a laser attack. These are also mapped to the right and left bumpers, respectively. An Oath to the Stars also has support for a very wide range of controllers as well. All of these controllers map identically to other controllers like Xbox One, PS4, and many, many more.
The H01's main shot feels pretty powerful by all accounts and can easily be used to take out most enemies in the game efficiently. The laser can too, if used properly. The laser is dependent on a gauge respective to the player's side of the screen that fills with yellow pickups dropped from defeated enemies. As the laser is used, the gauge will deplete. Pretty simple, but there's also a pretty serious catch.
Players really need to get up in the enemy's grill to adequately deal damage with the laser. Fire from too far, and players might as well just use the main shot, as the laser is less efficient at further distances. This is pretty problematic when attacking larger enemies. For one, larger enemies have dense, erratic attacks that become almost unavoidable at close range. For another, enemies can fire at the player from behind, while some other fire patterns will double back at the player, once again, from behind.
The H01's hitbox is defined by a small yellow point on the craft, which gives it a good amount of leeway when it comes to avoiding enemy shots. And oh boy, are there ever a lot of enemy shots, but not in an especially good way. Even on easy and normal, there are a lot of cheap attacks and patterns, especially the small, sneaky, fast shots from behind, and the snaking patterns that frequently occur from some larger foes. Some spinning enemies have laser attacks that prevent effective counterattack, or attack in general. It's pretty frustrating.
There's also a distinct lack of bullet clears in An Oath of the Stars. With no bullet clear when players end up getting hit, it makes for a confusing, panicked recovery from death that can sometimes lead, to death. Some bullet clears do occur during boss fights, but not during the stages proper. This could really have been helpful in making the game more approachable and less cheap on the whole, even on normal and below.
With that said, the control in An Oath to the Stars is also so simple that it almost feels as if it's missing functionality, and it pretty much is. Indeed, with no bomber function or focus movement, critical elements in making a truly playable bullet hell shooter are missing. We could probably overlook the obtuse get close to an enemy for the laser to work better thing if it meant that players had access to defenses and finer control to avoid frequent death at the hand of cheap popcorn enemies.
The bosses also have very counterintuitive attack phases. Oftentimes, the worst patterns are the first ones, rather than getting progressively harder. Many patterns are also completely unreadable as well. Stage 2's boss is almost completely impossible to follow without biting it at least once. Meanwhile, the easiest boss in the game, as it turns out, is the final boss.
Another critical misstep in the game's core structure is when a player runs out of lives in co-op gameplay. Rather than having the game continue like pretty much any co-op shmup since the 80s, even those with checkpoints in single player like Salamander, the game will stop dead in its tracks while the other chooses whether to continue. Worse still, any player can just press the enter button and force the game to continue, but not before getting totally disoriented while trying to avoid constant death.
It might sound like we're just bagging on this game because we're not giving the game a fair shake or we haven't spent enough time with it, but hear us out on this. To put all of what we've just said here into perspective, pretty much all of the Danmaku greats we've seen so far on Bullet Heaven have very specific mechanics at play that make them great for players of most walks of life, even novices. Bullet clears for taking out specific large enemies, a bomber that allows a player to escape death through strategic use, shots that are never shot directly from behind without a discernible pattern, and, most importantly, a continued system in co-op that doesn't totally f*** up the surviving player's attempt at avoiding dense constant fire. These essential mechanics are completely missing here.
We also kind of have to ask the question, if the final boss is Chiyoko, why is Chiyoko also the second player in co-op games? It completely breaks the story, seeing as Hoshiko is literally in search of the very person flying right beside her. In the end, An Oath to the Stars felt less great than we had hoped, with too much in the way of frustrating, cheap deaths from square one. We're sure that others are of the same mindset. There are comparatively very few score entries for any other difficulty outside of easy. Where the gameplay falters though, at least there is a fairly solid, though simple and basic, scoring system at play.
The scoring mechanics in An Oath to the Stars is very simple, just like its gameplay mechanics. Essentially, outside of enemy destruction, a simple score multiplier is used to boost a player's score. In addition, power pickups will also boost the player's score slightly.
All players really need to do is kill as many enemies in as short a time as possible, and the player's multiplier will climb. Indicated by a gauge on the player's respective side of the screen, the multiplier can be raised to a maximum of 5. While individual kills work, rapid successive kills fill the gauge much faster.
Audio cues will alert the player when the multiplier rises and falls in real time, so as not to be a distraction, which is nice. If a player does not kill off enemies in a certain amount of time though, the gauge will deplete and the multiplier will fall back down to 1 times. If a player dies, their multiplier is also lost.
At stage end, a bonus is awarded in direct correlation to the boss's bonus timer. In addition, a no death and difficulty bonus is also awarded, the latter of which changes according to the difficulty chosen. A letter grade is also applied, depending how well a player does from stage to stage.
That's actually the entire scoring system. Each individual stage as well as the full stage set have score entries on the worldwide leaderboards, which allows players to stack themselves up to others around the globe, which adds replay to the package. However, mustering the patience to keep at the game with its often ridiculous fire could limit how much players will want to come back for more. An Oath to the Stars is a game that could really have used a good boost in its presentation. It's not to say that what's here is bad, just bland.
We'll be blunt. The visuals aren't exactly eye-catching. Everything in this game is represented in flat, cel-shaded 3D models with nothing save for their shape to differentiate them from each other. The backgrounds are also fairly drab, though later stages add interesting geometric elements to the mix. It's just barely serviceable in the end, but could have used textures on, well, everything, frankly.
At the very least, bullets are easier to see as a result, though as we saw earlier, it doesn't help especially well. Meanwhile, the drawn elements aren't completely our cup of tea either. The art style is a very subjective thing though, so others might get more mileage out of the game's visual presentation than we did. There are some issues with the UI in general. Some of the UI will get all jumbled up in Tate, for example. This could be fixed with a simple patch, but it's super bothersome right now. Also, what's up with having a shield around your craft when you don't actually have a shield? At the very least, it's misleading, and it's definitely a distraction. We also noticed that, at times, the backgrounds would disappear.
On the sound front, An Oath to the Stars has sound effects that work well throughout the whole game. At the same time though, nothing really sticks out either. The effects used for the multiplier is probably the most noticeable sound effect outside of the awesome boss alert effect.
An Oath to the Stars BGM is composed well enough too, though again, not a lot sticks out in our minds with regards to standout tunage. There's a lot here that sounds reused, though it could just be that the soundtrack is heavily thematic. Once again though, it works all the way through and ended up being the best part of An Oath to the Stars, despite being kind of weak.
The story here is also serviceable, but comes off a little oddly in some respects. Again though, this is very highly subjective. And again, what the heck is the point of having the character that the player is fervently searching for used for the player to ship? Baffling.
Rounding out the presentation are a number of options for controls, audio, video, and screen layout, including Tate mode. Steam achievements are also present for even more replay. So, how does An Oath to the Stars stack up? Let's take a look. The HO1 controls well enough on average, but a lot more could have been done in the game to make things more approachable.
No bomber and no focus makes the HO1 speed more of a liability, especially with super dense enemy fire.
An Oath to the Stars is hard, but for the wrong reasons. Most of our deaths were from cheap shot popcorn enemies.
When the final boss is easier than any other boss in the game, there might just be some imbalances in the difficulty.
At only 5 stages, An Oath to the Stars feels short.
Single-stage score attack, multiple difficulties, and online leaderboards will extend players' time with the game, though.
On the whole, An Oath of the Stars runs smoothly enough visually.
But the visuals can get all jumbled up in Tate.
An Oath of the Stars definitely has a good selection of effects in BGM to make things at least mildly interesting in terms of sound.
The OST wasn't our cup of tea, though. Despite this, the background music is fairly well composed.
The core mechanics of An Oath of the Stars didn't work especially well in practice thanks to enemy and shot behavior.
Outside of the laser mechanics, which are kind of busted, and the scoring mechanics, which might be too simple, there's not a ton to say about An Oath to the Stars' ingenuity, especially with critical Danmaku gameplay elements totally missing.
We played An Oath of the Stars for quite a while looking for that point where it clicked, and it never really did. Even using multiple controllers, we never really felt comfortable with the game's controls, nor were we able to follow a lot of the from-behind shots and super dense patterns. As much as we really wanted to like An Oath of the Stars, especially due to its source of recommendation, it fell well short of greatness for us. However, it's still a playable game with the right amount of patience. An Oath of the Stars gets a 2.75 out of 5. You can get a copy of An Oath of the Stars on Steam today for about $9.99 US. That's too bad. I really wanted to like this one, but man, some of those bullet patterns are just ridiculous, and not in a good way.
Those sneaky bullets are less fun than I would have liked.
This game definitely lacked a vast amount of what makes a modern Danmaku shooter great. Here are some other games we've taken a look at that didn't quite measure up to our expectations. And the multiplier will fuck.